Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning back in again this week to the That's a Wrap podcast with your hosts,
Raja.
Kenny
Tiani.
Jalen.
and Julian will be joining us a little bit later. This week, we will be discussing a film called Pan's Labyrinth, which is a 2006 historical thriller film based in Spain. Throughout the course of this movie, we see how many different components are used to draw us into this battle between good and evil, which is really just a metaphor for democracy versus fascism, but we'll get into that a little bit later. First thing though, we're gonna take a look at the characters and acting and how they made the characters in the film just really come alive. So Naja, take it away.
Okay, so I'm just gonna highlight a few of the main characters. So first we have Ophelia, who's also known as Princess Moana. She's played by Ivana Vaquero. She more recently played in movies such as like High Seas and Feedback. And when she played this character, she was around 12 years old. Her character is naive and vulnerable, and she does majority of the tasks that she's asked to do from Fawn or the Pale Man. And she helps her sick pregnant mother, yet she breaks some of the crucial instructions given to her by Fawn. Next, we have the captain's wife, who's also Ophelia's mom, who is Carmen. She's played by Ariadna Gill. She played in other films like Rescued Under Fire. She's pregnant with the captain's baby and married to Captain Vidal. And then throughout the film, the baby makes her sick, which causes complications between her and her family. And we have Captain Vidal. He's played by Sergi Lopez. I hope I'm saying that right. And he normally plays villainous roles, so it's just fit for him to play this role here. He's also played in films such as La Boda de Rosa. And he's actually not Ophelia's actual father. He's established as a ruthless character from the beginning of the film when he ruthlessly murdered a father and son who were just hunting for their family. That beginning portion kind of alludes to like his savagery throughout the rest of the film. He constantly scolds Ophelia and cares more about his hypothetical son rather than Carmen or his wife, even though it wasn't confirmed in the beginning if he was having a son or not. Next, we have Serrano, who's played by Cesar Vea. He also played in Isabel and El Tudor. He's a soldier in Captain Vidal's army, and he's basically Captain Vidal's right-hand man. Next, we have Mercedes, who's played by Maribel Verdú. She plays in other films such as Snow White, The Flash, The Lighthouse. She kind of establishes her sneaky nature from the beginning of the movie. She assists Captain Vidal, but she's really just trying to understand like his fighting tactics because she's actually assisting her brother, who is actually the enemy army. Then you have the Doctor, played by Alex Angulo. He also played in films such as Dying of Laughter and The Great Vasquez. He's pretty much doing the same thing as Mercedes, where he's working with Captain Vidal, but he's also assisting the brothers' army, whose name is Pedro. Then you have Fawn, or the Pale Man. He's played by Doug Jones. He's also in like Fantastic Four and Hocus Pocus. So you see him in like other like fantastical films. He's the first character to speak to Ophelia about the labyrinth and gives her the book of Crossroads, which helps her throughout the film. Continuously gives Ophelia instructions about what she should do as Princess Moana. And he's obviously established as a mysterious character. And lastly, you have Pedro. He's played by Roger Casamajor, and he's Mercedes' brother, who is in the opposite army as Captain Vidal.
Thank you for that, Naja. Now, we can't truly analyze a film without taking a careful look at the script, so I'm going to talk about that a little bit more today. So first and foremost, this movie was written, produced, and directed all by the same person, Guillermo del Toro. He takes his work very seriously. And for this film, I opted to watch the actual original Spanish sub version as opposed to the English dub because I felt like it would encapsulate his actual vision and movie better. This movie, it's the screenplay is so good that it was nominated in 2007 for an Oscar for the best original screenplay, and currently it currently sits at 145 of the greatest movies of all time on the Internet Movie Database. So I thought that was an interesting tidbit. But so yeah, let's get into it. So for screenwriting, it's a well-known thing in the industry that the first 10 pages of screenwriting is like you have to captivate your audience, like you have to get your hook in there, you have to get them hooked to the movie. And the first 10 screen pages roughly translates to the first 10 minutes of the movie, and that's exactly what Del Toro does. He starts the movie off with like a flashback, and it's really like a you're probably wondering how I got here type of moment. You see Ophelia bleeding out, you're like, like what's this? And he ends up eventually bringing it all full circle, and that's how the movie ends. But like I said, he really captivates your attention at first by drawing you in, like, oh, what's this? And like he's able to set the scene. Like he introduces so many aspects that will come up later in the movie, just in the first 10 minutes of the movie. Like I said, he's really good at setting the scene. You see that it's post Civil War Spain, so it's not surprising that the main conflict ends up being between the army and the rebels. And there's this principle in filmmaking that I looked up. It's called Chekhov's gun, and it's pretty much it just means like if you include something in a movie, you have to use it. Like there's no point in putting something in if you're not actually going to use it later on, and that's exactly what Del Toro does. In the very first scenes, we see that Carmen's pregnant, and again, that obviously comes back into play because that's Fidel's whole quest. He wants another child, like that's his actual own heir instead of just a stepchild. And then even like with when we see Ophelia playing with the stones by the statue, like that foreshadowing the task that the fawn's going to give her later on. And there's even a point at the very beginning, like when Carmen's pregnant and Vidal has her put in a wheelchair, like that kind of symbolizes how he's trying to place her beneath him. So it's just very good character development from the very beginning, the way that the screenplay is. And Del Toro also does a good job of including emotional shields. Ophelia's emotional shield would be obviously the book in the fantasy world that she escapes into, and that propels the entirety of the plot. From the very beginning of the movie, again, he introduces her reading a book in the car. We see her like this, and then obviously, so it's not surprising when she slips into this world of fantasy later on. And it's ironic that she thought that these books and fantasy were going to protect her, but then eventually was the reason for her downfall because it's the reason Captain Vidal ends up coming after her. And then also with Vidal, a quote that I saw from Hitchcock was the stronger the villain, the stronger the picture. And that definitely serves true for this as well, because like I said, Vidal really facilitates the whole plot. Like he shows authority over the family, over soldiers, literally over anyone he comes in contact to. Like he's ruthless. He doesn't care who you are to him. If you're no longer serving the purpose that he wants you to, he will really end you. And then like from early on, it makes you ask the question, like, how far is he really willing to go? Like, would Vidal be like even willing to kill a child, kill a woman? And spoiler, the answer is yes. He doesn't care. He'll literally do anybody. So I thought that was interesting. And then with the screenplay too, the last thought I had was it was really good use of dramatic irony and tension. Like there's so many times when we find out stuff that the characters don't know. Like we might find out a little bit of Vidal's plot or the Fawn's plot or what Ophelia is doing, but the other characters don't necessarily know yet. And it makes you really wonder, like, will Ophelia succeed in her shenanigans? And even though from the start she's killed, you still kind of have faith that she's going to be able to make it through because that's just how good the screenwriting is. You feel like the character is going to be developed. And then just overall, I thought it was just really well-placed screenwriting. It makes you ask a lot of questions that they know they're going to answer later on. So overall, I thought the screenwriting was really good. And now that we've looked at the script, let's delve a little bit deeper into the settings and wardrobes and how those impacted the film and really brought them alive. So take it away, Jayla.
Thanks, Kenny. So yeah, the incorporation of nature, fantasy, and reality are kind of what make Pan's Labyrinth so peculiar and interesting. I'll go ahead and start off with the setting. It's set in Nevada after the end of the Spanish Civil War, like Kenny mentioned. And it was actually shot in rural Madrid. So they're actually in Spain, but like the period of time that they were shooting this film, the forest was in a drought. So they weren't able to do any of the actual explosives or any of the scenes like with the guns or anything until the very, very last scene right before they closed set. So a lot of what you see is CGI and it's implied action. Much of the setting is dark. It's wooden cobblestone structures with candle lighting. The lighting is very cool aside from the brightness of the fire and most of the scenes. And then as we travel into Pan's Labyrinth with Ophelia, we continue to see things covered in moss or mud, especially under the tree roots. So it's very earthy. You feel like you're very much in a mythical place for most of the film. The comparisons are drawn between reality and fantasy. Like the dinner with the captain versus the mission at the Pale Man's Feast. So like between the fantasy and reality worlds, although they're supposed to be very separate and different, there's a lot of parallels that can be drawn, especially with the way that they did the setting. But the entire setting is really somber. And then we get into the underworld where everything is bright and golden and red. So there's a lot of different contrasts throughout the setting of this movie. But going into costume and design, because this is what I feel really makes the movie. Lala Hot was the lead of costume and design on this set, and our director Del Toro ended up giving most of his salary to go towards the Fawn's costume, because CGI was like heavily used in this film, but a lot of it really was makeup and costume and prosthetics. So starting with Ophelia, we're first introduced to her, and she's draped in a gray overcoat, and she has on a black beret with a green dress, and the green dress kind of it matches the wilderness that surrounds her. And this motif of green follows her throughout the entire film. So as she first sees the labyrinth that will expose the secrets to her, she loses her black beret, and we never see that hat again. It's gone. But she always keeps some type of component of green in her wardrobe, such as the nice green dress that her mother makes for her, like hand makes for her for the dinner with the captain. And this dress is notable because it's accompanied with a white smock, which closely mimics that of Alice in Wonderland. So we're seeing Ophelia wearing this dress as she travels into the forest with the Book of the Crossroads, knowingly venturing into her own version of Wonderland. And accompanied with that dress is a pair of brand new shoes, which gets ruined in the mud of the under roots of the tree as she goes underground. And so this kind of just goes to show again, like she has this lovely white smock on, but it is covered in mud because her costume doesn't really deviate too much from earth tones until she dies. So once she dies, that's when we see her shift from this green, earthy color to vibrancy, luxurious red and golden. And I think this is really, really important to note because green and red are complementary colors. Green is what she has on while she's alive, while she's fighting this struggle. And then once she kind of achieves all of the things that she was trying to accomplish and is reunited with both of her parents, she has on this red, which is also like, red is seen as like a royal color, and she's supposed to be Princess Moana. So, anyways. So moving forward with the mother, Carmen. Carmen and Ophelia, for the most part, have on the same type of coordination going on. When we're first introduced to Carmen, she has on gray like her daughter, but as she starts to experience her pregnancy complications, we see her more in white. So we see like the white smock that Ophelia has on, accompanied with the all white that her mother has on while she's giving her daughter the dress. And for the captain and the militant officials, the military like officials, they're always spotted in blue uniforms with golden accents, and they have on these leather black gloves and these blue hats. And they're always easy to spot because they don't really stray from that costume. And the officials are extremely proper and well kept. They're never seen dressed down or out of uniform. And if they are dressed down or out of uniform, it's because they're working on whatever piece of them. So like cleaning their hat, buttoning their jacket, shining their boots, something like that. However, we see the captain begin to shed the layers of his uniform as he's exposed for all of his monstrosities. So first thing that he loses is his black gloves. And then that was symbolic of forcible control because like the first time that we see him, he grabs Ophelia's hand extremely hard and like the glove squeaks. It was a sensory experience there. But after he loses his gloves, we see his hat removed, and eventually like the entire button down and blazer are omitted. So he is going through this transformation where he's literally like taking off layers of his uniform as he becomes unhinged, for lack of a better term. So once he's completely unhinged and quite literally power drunk, we see him covered in blood and bandages, and he's down to just like his tank top and trousers. And that was towards like the very end of the film, right before he dies. As for Mercedes and the other civilians, they're all seen in neutral tones, dark browns, grays, dingy whites. They wear layers in their clothes because they're not really like thick or durable. And they come across as unkempt or, you know, in comparison to the regime that they're being held by, dirty. And then my favorite, Pan the Fawn, or Pan, my bad. Pan the Fawn. So Pan is supposed to represent a mythical creature. And since this is based in fantasy, the conception of this being is entirely up to Del Toro. So Fawn is like a towering goat-like humanoid creature. He is complete with horns and hooves, and he has long, gangly, pointed fingernails. They constructed his face to have higher cheekbones, with eyeballs that are cloudy, and they don't really have any pupils. And he has long, stringy hair like a goat, but he moves kind of mechanically and eerily. Um, and this costume is top two, not two. It's very iconic. And like I said, most of Del Toro's salary went towards this costume because although they did use CGI, it's really the makeup artists like layered that on, completed the entire costume. Like people recreate this costume with just materials in real life, like no editing, anything like that. And that also goes for the Pale Man, because this creature is very unsettling. The fawn is creepy, but this guy's like actually disgusting. He's literally like a pale man, but he has no eyes. He has slits for nostrils. His mouth is all droopy. He looks old and decaying, and everything about him is saggy and fleshy. And his hands are bloodstained from eating children. So, like, the first thing that you see is him at the table with his hands, and he just looks saggy and gross. Then he flips his hands over and he puts the eyeballs in his hands, and he goes like this. And that's like, I think when you think of Pan's Labyrinth, that is one of the first images that you think of, the saggy guy with hands in his eyes. So the costume crew did an incredible job. The setting was well used, and it really brought everything together in this film.
So thank you for your insightful thoughts, Jalen. Definitely appreciate that. And now we know a film can't really come together without the good use of camera, editing, and good angle work. So how did it come together for this film, Siani?
So I'm just going to talk about like the three different aspects I noticed in places and scenes for this film. So I really noticed the contrast between the real world, the fantasy world, and then not only the fantasy world, but like the fantasy world where Ophelia meets Pan, the fawn. So all of those are very different in a sense that the film really toggles between like the real world and the fairy tale or fantasy world that Ophelia immersed herself in. And the film is mainly shot in low lighting, but the lighting does change depending on the scenes and where they actually are in terms of like reality or fantasy. So a lot of shadows and low lights and contrast were used to show like really grim vibes in the real world, and some high and like in contrast, some high key lighting was used in the fantasy world to make it feel more mystical. The darker shadows of the fantasy world are shown featuring like blue hues and low lightings. And Ophelia only sees the mystical creature at night, which is why the blue complements this vibe, because at night with the low lighting and the blue, it kind of creates this, like I said, like grim feel or like more mystical feel and mysterious. I don't know if you guys are familiar from like when you go to a haunted house and it's like they have the fog machines, and it's like if they have like the lightings on the side and they have like blue, it makes it more like spooky. So that's the vibe it gave me. As I said, the dark lighting also adds the mysterious feel because the creature is never fully lit. So it kind of is hard for the viewer to decide what the creature actually is if you're not familiar with that mystical creature and how they're supposed to look. As Jalen said, it was completely up to Toro on how he wanted to depict the creature, and the use of lighting I feel like really enhanced and created the mysterious and like spooky aspect of it, of his whole even the costume, it really complemented that. And the fantasy world often shows like soft shadows and highlighting and low contrast, making it feel more light and mystic, and instead of like dark and mysterious. And color is used to really decipher between the real world and fantasy. And we're also going to talk about this later because color has a way of portraying themes as well, like Jalen said. The color is used, like I said, the color is used to decipher the real world and fantasy world. But like as I previously said, like noted like blue hues and used at night in scenes to intend to create a grim feeling, as opposed to like gray and green hues that are used in the real world, and then like warm hues that are used in Ophelia's fantasy world. So like those are the three different places that like you can clearly see like the transition between like one to the other. And I think lighting and shadows and hues played a great, like huge part on that.
Honestly, couldn't have said it better myself, Siani. Now I think we should just touch on a little bit of the psychological impact from the film that you guys felt at least. Feel free to cut me off on any point if you have any other thoughts. But for me, the first two main thoughts I had, I kind of wanted to tie it back to the psychology classes I'm taking right now. So I'm taking social psych right now. We're talking a lot about like obedience and disobedience, Milgram studies, stuff like that, conditioning. And I thought it was really interesting to see that and how it played out real life in the movie in terms of who obeys and who disobeys. Because sometimes you would think people would obey because it's in their best interest, but other times you see them disobey. So like, while psychology teaches us like, yeah, you can condition people to do what you want them to do to an extent, this movie kind of showed like people will still be disobedient if they really want to. Like the rebels, if they feel like there's something, a bigger cause, something bigger than themselves, they're willing to be disobedient for it, even if it's they and their family have to get killed for it at the end, because Bedell really doesn't care if people are disobedient. He'll just handle it regardless. But I thought that was definitely interesting. And then another class I was reminded of is my developmental psychology class, just watching Ophelia, her whole story play out, because when you're that age, you're definitely much more impressionable. Like your brain's obviously still forming. So it's interesting to see like how she escapes kind of into her fantasy world and uses it as a coping mechanism. And then with that, it also kind of showed me like the concept of reality is really subjective, because like it's everybody has their own personal reality. And I feel like that was really emphasized in the scene where Ophelia's with her younger sibling holding the baby, and then Bedell comes and he can't see Pan, but she can. So that kind of showed to me like reality is definitely subjective, and like life is kind of what you make it to an extent, because what you see is going to be different than how somebody else sees something, metaphorically and literally.
Yeah, I agree. I think I looked at it in more of a political sense as well, because this movie is really about like fascist regimes. So you kind of see like the impact that power hungry people have on their communities and on their society. How like one individual can kind of brainwash an entire group of folks and kind of just rain terror on people until everybody dies, basically. Like so many lives were lost and sacrificed because one person just kind of took it and ran. So I think tying that back into like obedience and disobedience, kind of being able to recognize when something is not right, and not only recognize it but act on it, is something like that's an internal battle, and that takes a lot of courage and strength to accomplish.
Yes, I definitely agree with that, Jalen. And I also like noticed the difference, like the theme of like life and death. And this like kind of ties back to like what you were saying. Like I said, that's why I was going to come back to the colors, like you were saying about the green versus the red in terms of like life or death. And Ophelia's dad is already dead when this happens, and then she begins as the immortal princess and then enters the mortal world, and then that's when she dies. So it's just like that contrast between life or death, and like like you said, like noticing it. And that's like one of the main impacts it had on me, because it was like showing it in a different light, or like more symbolic, not just like saying that it happened, but like also showing it in different aspects, whether it be like color and like catching that with the eye, like you said, like you noticed that she always had green in her dress, like what she was wearing when she was alive versus when she was dead. Like that's important things to note, and like how it's actually portrayed, and whether the audience will like catch it is like an impact in itself.
Yes, I agree with all of those. Really wanted to emphasize again just how they used power in the film, and how power literally ended up killing them, like everyone, because what's it called? Vidal wanted so much power and so much control. And so, yep, I just think that all of that really just ties in with the psychological impacts of the film.
And everything you guys said was definitely good, and I completely agree. But one last thing I want to put in there that I just realized, like after hearing the things you guys said, it seems like this whole film is just based on duality. Life, death, fantasy, reality, red, green, obedience, disobedience. So like I think that's just definitely interesting to note that everything's kind of balanced like that. But overall, like I said, definitely a powerful film. And then lastly, we're gonna have Julian talk a little bit about the music in the film and how powerful it was to wrap up our podcast.